You know that moment when your entire world shifts in the span of 30 seconds? When everything you thought you knew about your family just crumbles? Well, buckle up because I'm about to tell you about the Christmas dinner that destroyed my family's biggest lie and nearly destroyed me in the process. Picture this: December 23rd, my parents' dining room. The whole extended family gathered around the table. My mom had gone all out with the decorations: twinkling lights, red tablecloth, the good china that only comes out twice a year. Everyone's stuffed from dinner, laughing over dessert, and my nieces are running around in their new Christmas dresses. It was supposed to be perfect. It was supposed to be one of those warm, fuzzy family moments you see in movies. Instead, it became the night my sister stood up during dessert and announced that our parents had decided to put the family property, the house we grew up in, the land that's been in our family for 3 generations, in her name alone. But here's the kicker: she didn't just announce it. She looked directly at me with this smug little smile and said, "Mom and Dad finally realized that some people just aren't responsible enough to inherit anything meaningful." The room erupted in applause. I'm not kidding. Actual clapping. My aunt nodded approvingly. My uncle raised his wine glass like it was a toast. My cousin whispered to her husband, "Thank God someone responsible is taking over." Another relative actually smirked at me and mouthed, "About time." And there I sat, fork halfway to my mouth, watching my entire family celebrate what felt like my public execution. But you know what? I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't storm out like they probably expected me to. Instead, I very calmly set down my fork, stood up from my chair, and said 5 words that made the entire room go silent. "Do you want to say the truth, or should I?" The sound of my aunt's fork hitting her plate was deafening in that sudden silence. My uncle started coughing like he was choking on air. My grandmother, who had been mid-bite of her apple pie, just froze with the fork suspended in front of her mouth. My sister's face went from triumphant to panicked in about 2 seconds flat. She snapped at me. "Truth about what?" But her voice cracked on that last word, and I could see the fear creeping into her eyes. Everyone leaned forward. The tension in that room was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Even the kids stopped running around and stared at us. Before I tell you what happened next, I need to know, where are you watching from? Because what I'm about to share is going to make you question everything you think you know about family loyalty and who really has your back when the chips are down. Let me take you back to understand how we got to this moment, because this explosion didn't happen overnight. This was 30 years in the making. Growing up in my family was like living in a twisted fairy tale where my sister was Cinderella and well, I was the ugly stepsister, except we had the same parents. From the time we could walk, the favoritism was so obvious, it was painful. When my sister finger painted a blob that vaguely resembled a tree, my parents would frame it and hang it in the living room like it belonged in the Louvre. They'd call relatives to brag about her artistic talent. When I built an entire fort in the backyard with my own hands at age 10, complete with a working pulley system, my dad glanced at it and said, "That's nice, honey. Go help your mother with dinner." My sister got praised for everything. Getting a C+ on a spelling test? Oh, she's improving so much. Remembering to brush her teeth without being told? Such a responsible young lady. Making her bed with the covers slightly pulled up? Look how neat and organized she is. Meanwhile, I was the one actually being responsible. I was the one who remembered to lock the doors at night because my parents would forget. I was the one who made sure we had groceries because someone had to keep track of what we were running out of. I was the one who figured out how to pay bills online when my parents were still mailing checks and forgetting half of them. But somehow, my independence was labeled as rebellious. When I learned to do my own laundry at 12 because I was tired of wearing dirty clothes, my mom told people I was difficult to manage. When I got a part-time job at 15 to save money for college, my dad complained that I was never around to help the family. The irony was suffocating. They made me responsible for everything, then criticized me for being too independent. And my sister? My sister was being groomed to be the future owner of everything, not because she earned it, not because she showed any particular responsibility or care for the property, but because she was the good daughter who smiled and agreed with everything and never challenged anyone. When I left for the city after college to start my career, you would have thought I'd committed treason. My parents acted like I had abandoned them. Never mind that I'd spent my entire childhood taking care of things they couldn't be bothered with. Never mind that I was trying to build a life for myself. I was the daughter who left the family. My sister, who stayed local and still called my mom 3 times a week to complain about her job, her boyfriend, and her credit card bills, was the daughter who stayed loyal. The emotional gap between us widened every year. Every phone call home felt like walking through a minefield. Every family gathering became an exercise in biting my tongue while they praised my sister for accomplishments that, honestly, wouldn't have impressed a middle schooler. But here's what really gets me angry. I kept showing up. I kept trying. Because despite everything, I loved my family, and I hoped that maybe, someday, they'd see me for who I actually was, instead of this rebellious villain they'd created in their heads. I should have seen this dinner disaster coming. The signs were all there in the weeks leading up to it. Suddenly, my parents were being overly sweet to me, like suspiciously sweet. My mom called me 3 times in one week just to chat. My dad, who usually grunted hello when I called, was asking about my job, my apartment, my dating life. It felt weird, but I thought maybe they were finally making an effort. My sister started posting these cryptic social media updates about big blessings coming soon and God's plan revealing itself. I rolled my eyes and kept scrolling, but looking back, she was practically broadcasting what was about to happen. The family group chat, which was usually nonstop chatter about nothing, went strangely silent whenever I contributed anything. I'd send a message, and it would just sit there with no responses until someone changed the subject entirely. Then there was the incident with my uncle. We were all on a video call for my grandmother's birthday, and he accidentally mentioned something about all that paperwork being finalized soon. When I asked what paperwork, everyone suddenly got very interested in their phones, and my dad quickly said it was just boring insurance stuff. I felt something brewing, but I couldn't put my finger on what. It was like sensing a storm coming, but not knowing if it would be rain or a tornado. The real story, though, the one that makes this whole thing so much more sinister, started months before that Christmas dinner. It was back in September. My parents called me, which was unusual enough, and asked if I could come home for the weekend. They said they needed my signature on some home insurance updates and that it was easier to do it in person. I should have been suspicious right then. Since when do insurance updates require in-person signatures? But I was trying to be the good daughter, so I drove the 3 hours home. My dad had a stack of paperwork waiting on the kitchen table. "Just need you to sign a few spots," he said casually, like I was signing for a package delivery. But as I started reading through the documents, something felt off. There were missing pages, page numbers that jumped from 3 to 7 with no explanation. Some sections were blacked out with thick marker. The numbers didn't make sense, values that seemed way too high for simple insurance coverage. I asked about the missing pages, and my mom got flustered. Oh, those are just technical things, legal jargon. You don't need to worry about those parts. When I asked about the blacked out sections, my dad got defensive. Listen, do you want us to have proper insurance coverage or not? We're trying to protect the family property here. But here's the thing, I'm not stupid. I may have been the rebellious daughter, but I'd been handling my own legal documents for years. I knew what insurance paperwork looked like, and this wasn't it. So I did what any smart person would do. I secretly took photos of every single page with my phone, every confusing number, every missing section, every weird clause I didn't understand. Then I made an excuse about needing to think about it overnight. I said I wanted to read through everything carefully because it's important to understand what you're signing, which seemed reasonable enough. That night in my childhood bedroom, I sent all those photos to my friend Marcus, who's a lawyer. I texted him, "Can you look at these documents? Something feels wrong, but I can't figure out what." His response the next morning made my blood run cold. "This isn't insurance paperwork. They're trying to transfer all financial liability for the property to you. Don't sign anything. Call me immediately." I called him, and he explained what he was seeing in the documents: hidden debts that I would become responsible for, property taxes that hadn't been paid in over 2 years, a pre-foreclosure notice that had been issued months earlier. "Your parents are in serious financial trouble," he said, "and they're trying to make you responsible for fixing it without telling you what you're getting into." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. My own parents were trying to trap me into inheriting their financial disaster while pretending it was just routine paperwork. I didn't sign anything that weekend. I made up some excuse about wanting my own lawyer to review everything first, which made my parents visibly nervous. But I didn't confront them. Not yet. I needed more proof. I needed to understand the full scope of what they were hiding. So I started digging. I researched public records. I called the county assessor's office. I looked up the property tax history online. What I found was worse than I'd imagined. The house was already in pre-foreclosure. Property taxes were over $15,000 behind. There were liens against the property that my parents had never mentioned. And here's the kicker. My sister didn't know any of this. She thought she was inheriting a valuable piece of property. She had no idea she was being set up to inherit a financial disaster. That's when I realized the real plan. They weren't just trying to trap me. They were trying to trap her, too. They figured if they could get me to sign the liability paperwork and put the property in her name, she'd be legally responsible for the mess, and I'd be financially on the hook to help clean it up. It was diabolical, and it filled me with a rage I'd never felt before in my life. For months, I said nothing. I played along. I showed up for family calls and pretended everything was normal while I gathered evidence and figured out my next move. But that anger was eating me alive. Every time my sister posted about her upcoming inheritance, every time my parents made comments about taking care of family responsibilities, every time relatives made passive-aggressive comments about my selfishness for living in the city, that fury grew stronger. They thought they were so clever. They thought they could manipulate both of us, pit us against each other, and somehow escape the consequences of their financial irresponsibility. They had no idea I knew everything. So, when my sister stood up at that Christmas dinner and made her triumphant announcement, when the family applauded like she'd just won the Nobel Prize, when they all looked at me with those satisfied smirks like I was finally getting what I deserved, I was ready. I had been carrying a sealed envelope in my purse for weeks, waiting for this moment, because I knew it was coming. I knew they'd try to make this public, try to humiliate me in front of the whole family. When I stood up and asked if they wanted to tell the truth, or if I should, I could see the panic in my parents' eyes. They knew. They knew I knew. I pulled that envelope out of my purse and placed it on the table with a soft thud that somehow seemed louder than any shouting could have been. Anyone who wants to know the real condition of that property? I said quietly, my voice steady despite the rage burning in my chest. Feel free to read. My sister reached for the envelope, and I could see her hand shaking. She opened it and pulled out the contents: photos of the foreclosure notice, screenshots of the overdue property tax statements, copies of the lien documents, and documented proof that my parents had attempted to put all the debt under my name without telling me what I was signing. My sister's face went white as she flipped through the pages. Her voice was barely a whisper when she said, "Mom, Dad, you told me everything was paid off. You said the house was worth over $300,000 and there were no debts." The silence in that room was deafening. My parents looked like deer in headlights. My mother started to stammer. "Now, honey, there's been a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" I cut her off, and for the first time that night, I let the anger show in my voice. "You tried to trick me into signing documents that would make me financially responsible for your mess. You lied to my sister about what she was inheriting. You planned this whole dinner to humiliate me in front of the family, while hiding the fact that you're about to lose the house." My uncle leaned forward to look at the documents. My aunt grabbed them next. As the papers passed around the table, the mood shifted dramatically. The family members who had been applauding my sister minutes earlier were now looking at my parents with horror and disgust. My cousin's husband, who had been smirking at me earlier, said, "Jesus, this is fraud. You could go to jail for this." My sister's fiancé, who had been sitting quietly through dinner, suddenly stood up. He looked at my sister, then at my parents, then back at my sister. "I can't do this," he said. "I can't build my life tied to this mess. I'm sorry." And he walked out, just like that. Left my sister sitting there with those documents in her hands and her whole future crumbling around her. My sister started crying. Not pretty tears, ugly, devastated sobs. "How could you do this to me?" she choked out, looking at our parents. "I trusted you. I believed everything you told me." My mother tried to save face. "Please don't embarrass the family like this," she said to me, like I was the one causing the problem. "We can discuss this privately." My father, true to form, tried to blame external circumstances. "It's been a stressful time," he mumbled. "The economy. Things have been tight." But the damage was done. The truth was out there, and there was no taking it back. And then, as if the universe had decided this night needed one more twist, there was a knock at the front door. My dad went to answer it, and I could hear him talking to someone in hushed, urgent tones. When he came back to the dining room, his face was gray. "There's, a property compliance officer here," he said. Something about needing to confirm documents for a pending violation report. The relatives started murmuring among themselves. My grandmother, who had been silent through this entire ordeal, finally spoke up. "What kind of violation?" The officer, a middle-aged woman with a clipboard and a no-nonsense attitude, stepped into the dining room. She looked around at all of us, clearly realizing she was interrupting something, but proceeded anyway. "I need to speak with the property owners about some discrepancies in your filings," she said. There are questions about the legal status of this property that need to be resolved. My parents tried to deny everything, but the officer was thorough. She asked about the tax situation, about the liens, about any recent attempts to transfer ownership or liability. It was like watching a house of cards collapse in slow motion. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Within 2 weeks, my parents were forced to put the house on the market to settle their debts. The house that had been in our family for 3 generations. The house that was supposed to be our inheritance, sold for barely enough to cover what they owed. My sister moved in with a friend temporarily, completely devastated. Her fiance didn't come back. Her world had imploded, and she was struggling to piece together how everything she'd believed about our family was a lie. I refused to get financially involved in any of it, not out of cruelty, but out of self-preservation. I had worked too hard to build my own stable life to let myself get dragged down by their poor decisions. The extended family, the same relatives who had applauded my sister's announcement and smirked at my apparent downfall, suddenly stopped enabling my parents. The truth was too ugly to ignore. My aunt and uncle, who had always taken my parents' side in family disputes, actually called to apologize to me. My parents were forced to attend financial counseling as part of settling their debts. Their reputation in the family and in their small town was completely destroyed. People they'd known for decades looked at them differently, knowing they'd tried to scam their own daughters. But here's what surprised me the most. About a month after everything fell apart, my sister called me. I almost didn't answer. I was still angry at her for the years of favoritism, for the smug announcement at dinner, for believing she was somehow more deserving than I was. But I'm glad I picked up the phone. She was crying, not the dramatic, attention-seeking tears I remembered from our childhood, but genuine, heartbroken sobs. "I'm so sorry," she said. "I was completely blind to what was really happening. I thought, I thought I was the good daughter, and you were the problem. But you were the only one trying to protect both of us from this mess." It was the first real conversation we'd had in years. She told me how our parents had been filling her head with stories about my selfishness and irresponsibility for years. How they'd convinced her that I didn't care about the family, that I thought I was too good for them. She'd believed it all. She'd seen my independence as abandonment and my success as a rejection of our family values. They turned us against each other, she said, and I was too stupid to see it. I won't lie. It took time. You don't heal decades of resentment and favoritism with one phone call. But slowly, carefully, we started rebuilding our relationship, this time with honesty instead of the illusions our parents had created. We started meeting for coffee when I came to visit. We talked about our childhood, about the different realities we'd experienced growing up in the same house. She began to see how she'd been sheltered from responsibility while I'd been burdened with it. I began to understand how she'd been manipulated just as much as I had, just in a different way. It wasn't easy. There were setbacks. There were conversations that ended in angry tears. But for the first time in our adult lives, we were being honest with each other instead of competing for approval that was never fairly distributed anyway. As for my parents, that relationship is still complicated. They eventually acknowledged that they'd made mistakes, but they never fully took responsibility for the deliberate deception and manipulation. My mother still occasionally makes comments about how the family used to be closer before all this drama. My father sometimes acts like the financial crisis was just bad luck rather than the result of years of poor decisions and dishonesty. But I've learned to set boundaries. I don't engage with their attempts to rewrite history. I don't take responsibility for their feelings about the consequences of their actions. And most importantly, I don't let their opinion of me define my worth anymore. The whole experience taught me something I wish I'd learned earlier. Telling the truth doesn't destroy families. Hiding it does. All those years of pretending everything was fine, of enabling the favoritism, of staying quiet about problems I could see coming, that's what was destroying our family. The truth, ugly as it was actually what allowed my sister and me to finally have a real relationship. It was what forced my parents to face the reality of their situation instead of continuing to live in denial. It was what showed the rest of the family who my parents really were behind their carefully maintained facade. Was it painful? Absolutely. Was it messy and complicated and emotionally devastating? Yes. But it was also liberating in a way I never expected. For the first time in my life, I didn't have to pretend to be someone I wasn't to earn my family's approval. I didn't have to suppress my intelligence or downplay my achievements to make other people comfortable. I didn't have to enable dysfunction for the sake of keeping the peace. I could just be myself, responsible, independent, successful. And if people didn't like it, that was their problem, not mine. The anger I carried for so long about the favoritism, about being undervalued and misunderstood, about having my character assassinated by the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, that anger finally had somewhere to go. It went into protecting myself and my sister from our parents' manipulation. It went into demanding honesty in my relationships. It went into building a life where my worth isn't determined by other people's damaged expectations. I still get angry sometimes when I think about all of it. I get angry about the wasted years when my sister and I could have been close instead of competing. I get angry about the financial stress my parents put themselves through and tried to pass on to us. I get angry about the relatives who were so quick to judge me without knowing the whole story. But mostly, I'm grateful. Grateful that the truth came out before it was too late. Grateful that my sister and I found our way back to each other. Grateful that I learned to value my own judgment over my family's opinion. That Christmas dinner was supposed to be my humiliation. Instead, it became my liberation. Now, here's my question for you. What would you have done if your family tried to hand you a house full of secrets? If the people who were supposed to protect you tried to trap you in their financial disaster? If you discovered that everything you thought you knew about your family dynamics was built on lies and manipulation? Would you have stayed quiet to keep the peace? Would you have confronted them privately? Or would you have done what I did and let the truth explode in front of everyone who needed to hear it? Because let me tell you something. Keeping quiet about family dysfunction doesn't protect anyone. It just allows the toxic patterns to continue. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for people you love is refuse to participate in their delusions, even when the truth is uncomfortable. Sometimes love looks like setting boundaries. Sometimes it looks like refusing to enable bad behavior. And sometimes it looks like standing up at a family dinner and asking 5 simple words that change everything. Do you want to say the truth, or should I? That's my story. That's how one Christmas dinner destroyed the biggest lie my family ever told and forced all of us to finally deal with reality. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't comfortable, but it was necessary, and I would do it again in a heartbeat.